can all join palms and repeat after me. I take refuge in the Buddha. I take refuge in the Dharma. I take refuge in the Sangha. Keeping the palms joined. Put the palms down. All right, good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
Good to see you all here. Nice to be here sitting. I think I say this often, but I often say the most important part of Buddhist teachings is, and then I go on a tangent on any one of like 80 different things. As you're coming in, just grab a seat up front if you can. Thanks. The most important teaching at this very moment, only because it's what's in my head, is the Buddhist teachings on impermanence. And often we may go through our days. If you're brand new to Buddhism, then this might be a new introduction for you. If you've been around it a while, then you've probably heard this word quite a bit. But very often, my experience of sitting with people is we think of impermanence as something like far away. And very often, people tend to look at impermanence in relationship to what we tend to value the most, which is what? I mean, I hate to call you all selfish and everything, but what do we tend to value the most? Ourself. Thank you for playing along, right? We value ourself. And so when we hear a teaching, we think, how does this apply to me? So then it would make logical sense that when we hear the teaching of impermanence, we immediately think that, how does this teaching apply to me and my life? And impermanence, meaning I'm alive, when will I die? Or when will they die? Or when will this relationship cease to exist? Whatever it might be. That very often impermanence is seen as something very far off. At least that's very often the approach people take, and that might not be the approach any of you take, but very often that's how people perceive impermanence. And what this does is it really skips over every moment between now and like the end. So when you begin to understand what impermanence is really touching on, it makes every moment of your life easier. Not how do I deal with the impermanence 20 years from now, or 2 years from now, or down the road, but how do I deal with impermanence every moment? Because all day today, you will deal with impermanence. Everything. Yeah. You good there? Thank you. All day today, you'll deal with impermanence. The entire day will go. Anyone have a plan today? Well, there's your first problem, right? Way too many of you have a plan. So let me back up to the other most important Buddhist teaching, which is abandon all plans. So for those of you who are foolish enough to have plans, does that same crowd in here think that your plan of the day is going to go exactly how you thought it would? Anyone in? You're like, yes, you're all in. It's going to work, all of it. From now until the moment you go to sleep.
I only have one plan.
You only have one plan. All right. I'm not sure if I want to ask what.
Making spaghetti sauce.
Okay. But that might not go as planned. Her plan was making spaghetti sauce. Wow, is that really all you have planned today?
Yeah.
That's great.
I have to shop for it. And then
Okay, so there's a lot of other things you have to shop.
Clean up after.
Yeah, say that again?
Eat it, clean up.
You have to shop for it. You have to clean up after. You have to eat it. There's a lot of things. I mean, is the spaghetti sauce it's not just gonna show up? Did you drive here?
Yes.
Okay. Are you convinced your car is gonna be there when you get out of here?
Yes.
This was a lot easier when people used to park where they weren't supposed to park. But so you're convinced. You're not in a yellow. You're not in a red. You're not across the street where they tow frequently. They don't actually. I'm just trying to scare you. But so a lot of things could happen. But we assume the car's there. We assume we're going to get to where we're going. We're assuming the store is going to have the ingredients we need for spaghetti sauce. Yeah. You're just making the sauce. Or you're making spaghetti.
Well, the spaghetti, yes.
So spaghetti and sauce.
Sauce is important.
For the spaghetti, there's a lot of things that have to happen for your one big plan, right? And there's a chance that some of them might not. I mean, I hope they do. I hope you enjoy the spaghetti and pasta sauce, but lots of things could potentially go wrong, right? May we all have a day where we're just focused on making pasta sauce, right? But impermanence really helps us understand that throughout our day, so many changes are going to happen. And as we continuously, I'm not just picking on you, but as we continuously convince ourselves that our plan is going to work, we set ourselves up for tremendous disappointment, frustration, letdown, whatever it might be.
It could be better than what you think.
It could be 1,000 times better than what you think. Yes. Very often we have a plan of the day and it's something that we're not looking forward to.
And the outcome will be better.
Way better, right? The outcome could be so much better than what we're anticipating potentially. If what we're anticipating potentially is not so pleasant. Or if we have a big something coming up and we think it's not going to go well, right? Anyone ever convinced themselves something was going to go terrible and then what do you know? It actually went okay. So our entire day is filled with change, things going better or worse than we potentially expected them to be. And so the teaching here isn't really about abandoning all plans. It's not realistic. That's not going to happen. But the teaching here is to understand that regardless of what your plan is, or regardless of what you think you have to get done, there will be changes throughout the day. And it is simply our ability or inability to adjust and adapt to these changes that cause the suffering. And to kind of close this for right now before we start the meditation practice, just based on a few things that have come up recently, is I really want to remind people to not look at impermanence as something that's down the road. That someday I'll lose loved ones, or someday I'll lose myself, or someday this great thing will end. Because those things will happen as well. But it's the smaller, I don't want to, make pasta sauce insignificant, but these aren't life-threatening things. So it is the smaller things that we are faced with on a daily basis, the smaller challenges that we struggle with regards to impermanence, that then when the big things happen, we have a really hard time. So try to practice embracing and adjusting to the things that happen throughout the day that occur quite differently from what we were expecting or hoping or planning. And then see what that does to you in that moment. And this is how we begin to bring impermanence into our daily lives, like today. So, yeah. So I'll pause there for now. We'll start with a meditation practice. A couple things I'll tell you before we begin. Nothing's going to happen to you. Right? You're not going to float away. You'll not have any mystical, magical experiences. The mind that races all day long is not going to shut off. Don't judge your practice. I mean, you don't ask yourself, is it working or not working? Are we doing it right? Are we doing it wrong? You're just going to sit. You're going to breathe. You'll hear sounds. This is life. Life is filled with chaos. And this practice is learning to get quiet and still within all of the chaos. Posture, you just want to be comfortable. If you're on a cushion, often it helps sliding to the front third. Pushing the stomach forward allows the back to straighten. Shoulders are relaxed. If you're on a bench or a chair, also trying to sit up straight. Relaxing the shoulders, hands around the knees or in the lap, whatever's comfortable. If you need to move during meditation, simply move. Movement doesn't make you a bad meditator. It just means your leg hurts. Phones ring, people cough. This is life. It's what happens. I'll guide us as we begin. We'll settle into a little bit of silence. And starting with the eyes closed if comfortable, or slightly open. Mouth open or closed. We'll start with taking 3 deep breaths slowly. And eventually settle into a natural rhythm of the breath. Noticing the mind as it wanders, jumping from thought to thought. Start with gently guiding the attention, focus, to the stomach or chest. Breathing in, feel them rise. Breathing out, they fall. Simply continue this practice. Observing sensation of breath. As the mind wanders, lost in thought, recognize it. Release that thought. Return attention, focus to the breath. Where's your mind? Lost in thought. Return to breath. Letting go of expectations. Letting go of judgment from the practice. Just sitting, breathing. Learning to be comfortable in stillness, in quiet. Just sitting, breathing. Keeping the mind alert. Aware of each sound. Each thought. Each physical sensation. But concerned with nothing, but sitting, breathing. And with the body still, rested, and the speech quiet, aware of all sounds, and the mind learning to settle. Know what it's like to just sit and breathe. Knowing with each breath, there's nothing else to do. Nowhere else to go. No one else to be. Everything beautiful, exactly as it is. Sitting, breathing. Once again, taking 3 deep breaths, slowly. And as you slowly open the eyes, slowly begin to move. The most important with the practice of meditation is to recognize how you feel now, immediately after. Compare this to how you typically feel throughout your day. Recognize the difference, if there is one. Ask yourselves how you prefer to feel every day for the rest of your life. And realize however you feel now, it's quiet, calm, still, or a busy mind, racing mind, whatever you're sitting with at this moment, has nothing to do with anything I said. It's nothing to do with how we sit, hold the hands across the legs. It's nothing to do with the sounds around us, or anything else for that matter. It has everything to do with your own mind and your own mind's reaction to an external condition. This is what the Buddha called pratitya samuppada, means dependent origination. This is the basis of the Buddha's awakening. The word Buddha simply means awakened. He was a human being no different than any one of us who began to understand why he suffered, why he got angry, sad, depressed, stressed, anxious. He began to understand the causal relationship of all phenomena. And what that means very simply for all of us, regardless of where you come from or what you believe in or where you think you're going, your whole life is filled with things that happen. You react. More stuff happens, more reactions. That's what we get. This practice is learning what it's like to respond to something quietly, peacefully, still. Because for most of us, the way you responded to the last 20 minutes is quite different from how you respond to everything else that's happening throughout your days. And so all we're working on is closing the gap to where the way you feel now is closer to how you feel always. Just as driven, motivated, productive, successful, whatever that means to you in your respective lives. But with a mind that's steady, clear, focused, distracted by nothing, disturbed by no one. This practice is not easy. It's not necessarily fun. Meditation, Buddhist practice is not an escape. It is direct perception into the present moment. And sometimes that present moment is incredibly difficult. And sometimes that present moment is quite lovely. But our perceptions of the present moment do not change that moment. So all we are working on is controlling our reaction to each moment as it arises. And if throughout our day we can respond to each moment, and this is the Buddhist teachings on equanimity, if we can respond to each moment in a very pleasant, observant way, as opposed to a critique or judgmental way, which I'm sure no one in this room would ever do any of that, but just in case. That's the practice, to observe what is happening, to not critique it, to not judge it, because then pleasant and unpleasant fall away, and you just abide in present moment. The Buddha taught very clearly that we seek pleasure and we run from aversion. Makes sense. And he taught that because of that, we spend our lives running away from what we dislike and running towards what we like, which then puts us in a situation to critique and label and judge every single thing that occurs in our lives. And therefore, we spend a majority of our time pondering what we like and don't like, as opposed to experiencing. And so as each moment occurs and we learn to stay present with it, we begin to, I feel, really embody and embrace, coming back to impermanence, what that practice is like. That each moment will change, each moment will pass. We have pleasant, wonderful moods that we're in, and those will fade away, and you might be in a terrible, miserable, grumpy mood. Thank God for all of us, the terrible, miserable, grumpy moods will also fade away. And then we may go back to a pleasant mood. But either way, it's just changing. That's why the breath is so important with the meditation practice. It's neutral. Pleasant, unpleasant, and neutral. Focus on sensation of breath, abide in present moment, and experience life as it occurs. Meditation is free. Buddhist practice is free. Sitting, breathing, learning to be kind to yourself and everybody else you interact with on a daily basis. And once we stop trying to change, fix, control, manipulate so many people and places and things around us, which is where we spend so much of our time. And as I've already addressed, we work on changing our mind and our reaction to the present moment. Life gets simpler. For me, this is just one final thing I want to touch on before we open up to questions, but this, really fundamental core first thing the Buddha ever taught, that life is suffering. And again, if you're brand new to Buddhism, that's the first thing he taught, but it doesn't mean that all of life sucks. And so if you open up Buddhism 101 and you start reading the Four Noble Truths, and as a good friend of mine years ago said, he got introduced to Buddhism like 20 years ago, he read the first page, it said life is suffering. And he said, well, this sucks. I'm going to look for something else. And then like 7 years later, he turned to page 2 and he realized, oh, there's more. All right. So to kind of follow up to what I was talking about earlier is the word dukkha, which translates to suffering. It doesn't mean your entire life is miserable. It means that we will experience a lot of discomfort, angst, dissatisfaction, pain, loss, things like this in our life. This is inevitable. We cannot escape this. And so for me as a practitioner, I've never looked at, well, okay, how do I end suffering? I don't take that approach. For me, the practice has been, how can I suffer slightly less today than I did yesterday? And it becomes a moment-to-moment, a day-to-day experience. Again, following the theme of don't think of as impermanence as something way down the road. Think of each day I will have opportunities and moments to suffer. And what and how can I respond? Or what can I do and how can I respond to suffer less? I have found that practice to be incredibly beneficial. And especially for those who, some of you, this may be like day one to Buddhist practice, and you might have heard life is suffering, and you'll spend the next 7 years trying to figure out how to end your suffering. Right? It's going to take longer than that. So it's not a race to end it. Just try to figure out how to do it less. And if you can suffer less each day, then you'll be a little more pleasant each day. And the people around you will thank you for being more pleasant. So with that, I'll pause. I always prefer really just to respond to questions, meditation, Buddhist practice, anything that's on your mind. And we'll use the rest of our brief time this morning for that. Yeah.
So as part of the Buddhist practice,
Yeah.
recognizing your suffering, because looking at my life, yeah, there is some suffering, but generally I don't recognize maybe the suffering.
Yeah. When you say, just to clarify, the first part, yes, but I'll come back to that in a minute. When you say generally there is suffering, but when you look at it, you don't recognize it, do you mean you don't see it as suffering, or in a maybe comparable way to others, you don't define it as suffering?
Both.
Both, okay. So, well, I'll just ramble and then maybe it'll address that, not just for you, but for anyone. Yes, the first part of your question, a big part of the Buddhist practice is to recognize our suffering. And sometimes that suffering is pretty minor, right? And sometimes it's pretty extreme. The word suffering is such a terrible translation of dukkha, which is why I throw out there discomfort, angst, dissatisfaction, right? You ever hear a song on the radio you don't like? What do? Change it. That's dukkha. Now, you're not going to sit there in bed at night and think, wow, I was suffering today because I heard a song I didn't like, right? Doesn't sound like suffering, but it was discomfort. It didn't sit well with you, right? I mean, that's why they invented TiVo and on-demand TV, because we don't like commercials, right? So we can pause it because we don't want to suffer through 7 minutes of commercials. The whole world is there to try to take away and make things simpler for us because we very often cannot sit with discomfort. You ever had food you don't like? Was it poison? Were you allergic to it? Did you want to eat it? No. This is dukkha. The world's not going to end. Your world's not going to end because you have food you don't like. But chances are, if we get food we don't like, we don't want to eat it. This is suffering. This is dukkha. Temperatures you don't like. It's too cold. You get a jacket. It's too hot. You want to put the air on. Ever had a friend or loved one tell you something you don't like to hear? This is dukkha. So this is what the Buddha, when he defined dukkha, again, often translated to suffering. Suffering sounds so intense, so heavy, so dramatic. Like, oh, I'm suffering, right? But discomfort, angst, dissatisfaction, little things throughout our day that occur that we just don't like. This is what the Buddha meant by dukkha. So for you, if you struggle, I don't know if struggle is the right word, but if you observe your life and you think, I'm not really suffering, then try to abandon the word suffering and just try to look at where throughout my day do I experience discomfort, dissatisfaction, dislike, angst, because those things will occur throughout our day. And then we look at what the Buddha taught, which is the second noble truth, which is what's the cause of these things. The cause of this discomfort, angst, dissatisfaction is the three poisons: the greed, the anger, and the ignorance. The greed is because we want more. The anger is because we don't like what we're seeing or hearing or tasting or whatever it might be. And then the ignorance is we're ignoring the truth, which is the reality of the situation. We're ignoring that this is how it is, and we're wanting it to be different, which is also where the greed comes in. Greed is not like gimme, gimme, gimme. Greed is, again, another word that when we hear greed, we kind of tie it to certain things. But this idea of greed is just, it's a craving, right? So we constantly have cravings for more. Now, unless someone fully enlightened being in this room I'm not aware of, we all experience greed, anger, and ignorance in our lives. This doesn't make us terrible, bad people. The Buddha wasn't asking us to recognize our dukkha to try to make us feel like we're bad people, right? But I roam around all day long. I've just been doing this long enough, and I'm fully confident and comfortable in my ability to recognize my own greed, my own anger, and my own ignorance. Jeff, I am greedy, I am angry, I am ignorant. And these are not judgments. These are not like, oh, well, then I'm miserable and depressed. I'm going to go in my room and cry. No, this practice is actually what got me out of being miserable and depressed and going in my room and crying, is observing my greed, my anger, and my ignorance, and practicing generosity to overcome greed, wisdom to overcome ignorance, and compassion to overcome anger. These are the three practices as taught by the Buddha to help us experience less dukkha. Okay? Does that help? So I think it's a good question. And I think for all of us, especially those who might be new, when we hear suffering, it sounds, and then to kind of the extreme is, yes, there is also tremendous suffering that we experience, death, loss, things like that, trauma, tremendous emotional pain, right? We all, at various moments of our lives, and some more than others, experience things like that. And so it's often a lot easier for us to say, yeah, that one time I was really suffering. But to me, that's one thing I really like about the Buddhist teachings is it's very practical day to day. Like, where am I uncomfortable in my life? Not just where's my extreme suffering. Because very often the extreme suffering is not much we can always do about that, except our relationship to it. So hope that's helpful. Yeah. And it is a challenge for all of us. I always throw out there to people to challenge, because for me, it's been a beautiful practice to spend today, pick one of them and just say, wow, okay, am I greedy today? It's not fun when you start to wake up to realize, you probably don't need 30 shirts in your closet. Doesn't mean you're a bad person for having them. Probably don't need 20 pairs of shoes. Probably don't need 15 pairs of pants, right? But we got them. So recognizing your own greed, anger, and ignorance is not always fun, but it's critical, I found, because then you begin to break through, and then you make changes in your life to cut through some of that slowly. You know? Don't get rid of all your shirts. So, other thoughts, questions? Yeah.
More basic meditation question.
Yeah.
How do you, so I find myself meditating, I use a timer or something like that. I'm sure the Buddha didn't ignore on some people, you need this app or something like that. So how do you,
Yeah.
how do you meditate? Like, when do you know to like end your meditation session without a timer?
Yeah.
Like
So the question for those who didn't hear it was, how do you know, like, or how do you end your meditation as far as a timer? Be sure the Buddha didn't run around telling people like to use a timer. He probably wasn't rocking the latest iPhone and, you know, putting on like, you know, some app. I'll say this first. For people who use meditation apps, right? A lot of people do. Great. If it's what, and this is just a general view, you know, Insight, I think Insight Timer, there's some other things out there. A lot of those apps that are out there, for many people, it like motivates them and inspires them and it commits them to doing it. So while I personally am not a huge fan of those things, I will always verbally express my support of it because a lot of people, it's what they need to do it. So I think it's phenomenal. I am a big fan of people doing meditation without having to use the thing that we're staring at all day long. That's why, you know, and without having to sign up for like $4.99 a month to not have to see an advertisement to do your meditation or something like that, you know? So I'm a big fan of the free stuff and not using this for meditation, but it is also a beautiful tool, right? I'm also not a fan of somebody saying, I'm going to sit for 20 minutes and every 3 minutes, like, has it been 20 minutes yet? You know, like looking at the watch. I mean, these are very practical questions. I'm also not a fan of someone saying, okay, I'm going to sit for 10 minutes today. And then tomorrow I'm going to bump it to 12. Because then very often from 10 to 12, you're like, wait, did I get to 11 yet? You know? And then you chalk it and we like grade it. Like I did 10 minutes today, I'm doing 12 minutes tomorrow. I'm a big fan of just sitting. Abandon this concept of time completely. The construct and notion of time is an attachment, a label, a judgment, and everything the Buddha was trying to get us to move away from to begin with. But here we are, we have to set a time for everything. I'll give you a practical answer eventually, right? But here we are, like, okay, here's my 20-minute meditation period, start, stop, done, check. We've just done everything the Buddha taught us not to do and applied it to our meditation practice, right? So I'm a big fan of just sit and breathe. And when you don't feel like sitting and breathing anymore, get up, right? Now, if you, like many, ignore everything I just said, and you still stick to your, I'm going to sit for 17 and a half minutes today, just set a timer. Make it simple. You know, just about every phone now has a timer. If you don't have a phone, get an old school kitchen clock that you can like turn. And you can even listen to it tick, 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 tick. And then maybe like some chicken will like, you know, make a noise at the end. Just set a timer, simplify it. Another beautiful practice is incense sticks, right? I used to do the Japanese incense sticks. They burn for about 25 minutes. Light it, and I do an eyes open practice. So light it and just stare at it and watch the incense stick burn. So you're not focused on how long has it been, but if you know that you just have 20 minutes before you head out for your day and you don't want like an hour to pass and then you're late for work, right? So in a practical sense, yes, you're carving out time, use a timer. Yeah.
I'm just trying to detach myself from the phone more.
Yeah, I understand. Exactly. And so that's what I'm saying. Maybe, you know, purchase some simple little tool that's not the phone that'll keep the time for you. I think they're called watches, I'm pretty sure. They still make them, you know? So, yeah. Yeah, you could watch those little like old school hourglass things, you know? Yeah. Days of Our Lives style for any of you daytime fans. Yeah. Does that help?
Yeah.
Yeah. Other questions? Yeah, the hourglass is great. Incense is great. Yeah. Watching the sunset. I don't know. Yeah.
Why, I was one of those who saw life is suffering, oh, I don't need this, I want something more positive.
Yeah.
Right. Why is the word continue to be used then?
I don't know.
If someone says life has discomfort,
Yeah.
I'm fine with that.
Yeah.
I understand that
Yeah.
suffering is a specific word, but yet it's used.
Yeah.
in so many.
You'd have to ask all the people who use it. I introduce it the way I learned it, which is the translation of the word dukkha, which is to suffering. And then many people I've heard teach change it and use discomfort, angst, dissatisfaction. But why people use suffering? It's the literal translation of the word dukkha. But the language doesn't always, as all languages, things just don't translate well with any language. So, I don't get too wrapped up in it. I just give the Buddha said life is suffering. And then I add, it's filled with it, it exists, and I add in the other words. But yeah, I don't know. You'd have to ask them. Yeah. Because yes, it can sound very miserable.
It's misleading.
Yeah.
And it's not, I haven't heard it from just one person.
Sure.
It seems to be in most of the texts.
Yeah, and like I said, it is the translation of the word dukkha. I mean, the answer to your question, why? Because that's the translation of the word dukkha.
I thought it was the opposite. I thought, well, it doesn't mean suffering.
No. Life is dukkha. Dukkha is the Sanskrit Pali word. Yeah, I'm talking to Travis. The Sanskrit or Pali word, the Buddha didn't say, and I quote, life, he didn't say in English, life is dukkha, right? He actually didn't even speak Sanskrit or Pali. If you want to get into like a history lesson on this, he spoke whatever would have been the local dialect in Magadha, which is where he was from, which would have been the Magadan dialect, right? And then it was all oral. And then when it was eventually written down 50 to 100 years later, I'm not a scholar, don't quote me on this, anything really, but it then was written down initially in Pali. So people say the Buddha spoke Pali, the Buddha spoke Sanskrit. The region the Buddha was from, those languages didn't exist where he was from. So he spoke in his local dialect. 50 to 100 years later, it got written down in Pali. Sanskrit translated to a bunch of other different languages. And in English, it translates to suffering. Dukkha, suffering. That's it. But yeah, I just put my personal ignorant spin on it because I find it more practical. Yeah.
I have a two-part question.
Yeah.
The first part with the meditation. So the means to the meditation is that feeling afterwards, that bringing back to self and peace. So having said that, in terms of practices, is there variations in how you meditate? I mean, I've done a walking meditation.
Sure.
One where you focus on a particular few words.
Mm-hmm.
Would that all fall into Buddhism too, in terms of meditation?
Sure. Yeah, so the question was, for those who didn't hear it, with regards to meditation, the first part was you said the means you feel is that feeling you have afterwards. And then there are other types of meditations. You've done a walking meditation, or there's meditations where you focus on words. Does that all fall into Buddhism? That question, right? So the first thing is, if anybody tells you that there is one way and one way only to meditate, leave. Maybe do the meditation and then leave, right? There are so many different types of meditation practices. And I mean, even here, the Dharma Bum Temple, we opened this 15 years ago to introduce different types of Buddhist practices. So within that, there are walking meditations, there are guided meditations, there are silent meditations, there are mantra meditations. There's so many types of meditations. And I don't necessarily think that any of them are right or wrong or good or bad. It's very much like, now I'll contradict everything I said earlier, because the reality is we're going to eat food we like, right? You're not going to sit down all day and eat a bunch of food you don't like. Same thing with meditation. If you do a meditation practice and you didn't find it pleasant, you're not going to keep doing it. So my suggestion would be to find, in general, a practice that works for you. right? Or early on, maybe a couple different ones and stick with those. But yeah, there are so many variations. For me, my background with Buddhism specifically, my introduction to Buddhism initially was through a Zen practice, and that's my specific Buddhist tradition is in a Pure Land, which is out of Taiwan, Buddhist practice, and Chan, which is Chinese Zen. And that practice is abiding in sensation of breath. And the Buddha taught Anapanasati Sutra, when breathing in, taking a short breath, know you're breathing in and taking a short breath. When breathing out, taking a long breath, know you're breathing out, taking a long breath. So that very specific teaching was to focus on sensation of breath. That's what was taught to me. That's what I've always practiced. So that's what I always share. Right? And then within the different schools of Buddhism, you'll find many beautiful different practices. The one thing, does that make sense so far? The one thing that I always kind of, I don't know if caution is the right word, but I'll just throw out the word caution. The one thing that I always caution people, and this is just from probably 15 to 20 years of leading meditation with people who have tremendous trauma, PTSD, traumatic brain injuries, combat vets, things like that, is that very often for that population, as many who may be in this room, when you sit in silence for 5 minutes, what are you stuck with? Yourself. And what are we always trying to run away from? Yourself. So sitting in silence for 5 minutes can be absolute torture. So what do I suggest you learn to do? Sit in silence for 5 minutes. Every so often. If we are constantly running away from our own thoughts in our mind, then we're never going to learn to be with our own thoughts in our own mind. And since our own thoughts in our own mind is the cause of our suffering, then learn to be with it. So if you're someone who, I'm not, just in general, if you're someone who doesn't like sitting in silence for 20 minutes, do guided meditations, but don't be afraid once in a while to say, okay, I can do this. I'm going to set my new little timer for 3 minutes, and I'm just going to sit here in absolute silence and be stuck with myself. I promise you will probably survive. If you can't do 3 minutes, then do 2 minutes. If that doesn't work, do 1. But I'm just not a fan of people never learning to be quiet with themselves. Again, for those who have tremendous trauma, flashbacks, images, it can be incredibly painful. And if that's the case, then yeah, just stick to guided meditations, visualizations, whatever it may be. They're all beautiful. Does that help? Yeah. Most important is that you find something you'll do. And that's kind of why I give the example of food. We all need to eat the rest of our lives. And if we're stuck with food we don't like, we're just going to stop eating. Unless you can learn to eat anything, and most people just aren't going to do that. So there's kind of this conventional practical reality that we all interact with as unenlightened human beings roaming around, that we're still going to look for food we like and meditations we like and music we like. And, it took me 3 minutes to get pasta sauce out of my head at the start of meditation. So I was like, what kind is it going to be? Is there going to be cheese? I was like, after 3 minutes, I stopped making pasta or sauce in my head. I can't make pasta. I can't make sauce either, but in my head I was. All right, so we'll close on that. We'll join palms. May the benefit of this practice be shared with all beings in all directions. May all be at peace. May all be free from suffering. May any merit gained from this practice be transferred to the more than 4 million lives that have been lost during this pandemic, and to their family and friends who continue to suffer to this day. May they all be at peace. May we all be at peace and free from suffering. All right, a few quick announcements before you all head out. Thank you for being here. My name is Jeff. I'm a Dharma bum. We opened up this temple 15 years ago to introduce Buddhist practice to those who show up. Those of us who lead, we're not monks, we're not nuns, we're not gurus, we're not masters, we're not teachers, we're not looking for students. We're just practitioners. We do our best to take our understanding of Buddhist teachings and put it into terms that hopefully make sense to those who show up. Just about every night we have different practices going on, as I alluded to earlier, different unenlightened people leading their own approach to Buddhist practice. So we were closed for 16 months due to the pandemic. We opened up about 3 months ago. So we have really only about half of our schedule going on right now. In person, Tuesday night, I lead the class. Wednesday, Alex does a metta, loving kindness practice. Travis does Dharma Bum Basics, and he shares different meditation practices on Thursday nights. That's in person, and then again here Saturday morning. Our recovery Sangha meets twice in person, Tuesday night downstairs and Sunday morning here at 10 a.m. Everything else is online. Sunday nights, again, another beautiful practice. We talked to Amy. We do a Tonglen practice Sunday nights online. It's a Tibetan Buddhist practice of sending compassion and sending and receiving for healing. So it's so many different types. So that's Sunday night online. And then anything that's not going on here is still virtual. So the temple used to open in the morning and be open all day until 9 o'clock at night. Now we open in the morning. We sit Monday through Friday, 8 and 8:30. So we do 2 25-minute sits. And then the temple is closed all day until the evening time, if and when we have a class. Saturday, Sunday, the temple is open from 12 to 3. So if anybody wants to just come and sit on a Saturday, Sunday afternoon, it's open. Buddha for You downstairs, same thing, was shut down for 16 months. It is also only open Saturdays and Sundays, 12 to 3, and Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday for an hour before class. So it is open now downstairs. If you need anything, Maggie's down there, go say hello. Other than that, that's also pretty much shut down during the week. So we appreciate you all still, checking in at the door and doing the RSVP for Saturdays and wearing the masks. We have to continue to do our best to keep this place safe and healthy for those who show up. So you continue to show up. So we appreciate that. I don't think there's anything else. The last thing that popped into my head about the life is suffering. I will say this though, it's not wrong. To say life is suffering, it's not wrong. It is. It's a lot of suffering. So let's work on these practices so we don't suffer, and we suffer less. So thank you all. Be safe. Tom, should I announce you guys sticking around a little bit? Yeah, and anybody wants to stick around and do some cleaning, gardening outside, there'll be some people doing that, so you're welcome to stick around and help out. Thank you.
This is wonderful. This
You're
is my
what?
first time.
Oh, no way. Right on.
Yeah.
What's your name?
Holly.
Holly?
Yeah, and I love your
Let me get this off before our whole conversation is
broadcasted.
broadcasted to our millions of